everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Catherine Barona with Levelset. We have a great panel lined up for you today. Thanks for tuning in, and I'm going to hand it off to our speakers to introduce themselves first and take it away with the state of women in construction and where to go from here. Thanks for tuning in, and also if you have any questions, please just save them for the end, and we'll definitely address those after the whole presentation has gone through. You're really in for a special thing today. These women construction attorneys are joining us from all over the country, and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Catherine, if it's all right, I'll kick off and let everyone know who I am so we can begin our panel presentation. Catherine, thank you to you for putting this together today. And thank you to Meredith and Mary. It has been such an honor to work with you on bringing this panel presentation to the Levelset attendees. So just to kick off, my name is Mindy Genteel. I am a partner in the national construction law firm of Peckar and Abramson. I am located in the Miami office, but Peckar and Abramson does have offices all over the United States. At Peckar and Abramson, I serve as the chair of our Diversity and Inclusion Committee, where I head our nationwide efforts to bring diversity and inclusion to Peckar and Abramson and our attorneys and employees, as well as to the industry in a larger sense. Peckar and Abramson is certainly committed to their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts within their own doors, but see this as very much a part of Peckar and Abramson's purpose to also broaden diversity within the industry as a whole. I'm proud to lead those efforts within our firm, and we are excited to use today as one of our efforts to try to increase awareness toward that goal within the industry. Also, I am a co-creator and now a co-moderator with Jan Tuckman from Engineering News Record of the annual Groundbreaking Women in Construction Conference. This is part of the effort that I was speaking about from PNA, Peckar and Abramson, or PNA, to increase diversity and inclusion in the industry in a whole. Last year, excuse me, last year we had over 1,000 attendees at the Groundbreaking Women in Construction Conference. So our conference has become a premier talent, education, and a way to promote women within the industry. I'm extremely proud to be involved with GWIC and look forward to many more years to come of great GWIC programming. By way of background, I started practicing law in the mid-1980s. And to some of you, that may seem like a long time ago. And in fact, it is a long time ago. I did not have a real desire when I started to practice law to really get into the area of construction law. But one of the partners that I worked with as a very young associate literally dragged me into practice in that area of the law. And it just did not take me very long to find that I had real passion for it. I loved this particular practice, and I've never looked back. I have essentially concentrated on construction law, construction dispute resolution for my entire career. And I love it as much, and in some ways more today than I did even when I got started. The landscape when I started in practicing construction law was different than it is today. There were very, very, very few women practicing construction law. And likewise, there were very few women in the construction industry as a whole. That brought with it very distinct and difficult challenges, being a woman in those two industries of the law and construction, where I just did not see other representation of women in either of those areas. I think we have advanced the needle somewhat, but having said that, I don't think that there has been a noticeable difference in too many of the areas that we address in diversity and inclusion. What we're going to do today is hopefully move that needle a little further toward true parity, true equality, and true inclusion for women who are either practicing in construction law or in the construction industry. So I'm excited to be here with Meredith and Mary to do that today. So thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. My name is Meredith Theobar, and I am a partner with the national firm of Gordon Reese, Scully, and Mansicani. Gordon Reese is headquartered in San Francisco, but we have, as part of our 50-state platform, we have offices in every state. So we're kind of your one-stop firm. I started my practice in Seattle. I graduated from Seattle University School of Law in 2009. So I have not been practicing quite as long as my co-panelists. And when I came out of law school, my focus was to find a mid-sized firm where I really would get to get my hands dirty, take depositions, do research, because as we all know, no matter how long you've been practicing your craft, you just got to dive in and get that experience. And so I landed in a construction firm, a mid-sized regional firm, and I just fell in love with it. I knew I wanted to do civil litigation. Not only did I fall in love with the lawyers, I really fell in love with the clients. I think contractors work very hard. I think they're definitely essential to all of our communities and our infrastructure. And I just really enjoyed working with them and protecting their interests in their business, and assisting them with, legal issues so they could get back to their business and focus on what they enjoy in their skill set. So I worked there for about 5 or 6 years. And then I went to another regional mid-sized firm and did a lot of government work, still in the construction arena, but I did a lot of false claims investigations, civil investigative demands, and then obviously key TAM and intervene lawsuits that resulted from those, whether we were able to negotiate them or they became formal litigation, which was great because I kind of got to do a lot of private work. And then when I went to my second firm, I was really in the federal and public contracting arena. And then kind of to go full circle, I've been with Gordon and Reese now for about 4 years. And I had joined my former mentor, and we'll talk about this a little later. He's exactly 10 years ahead of me. He jumped ship and went to Gordon and Reese a couple years ahead of me. I got some more experience under my belt, and then he took me under my wing, and I now work for him. His name's Alan Estes, and he is a co-chair of the National Construction Practice Group for the whole firm. So I started my practice in Seattle. I'm licensed in multiple states. I now co-manage our Idaho office. It's one of our firm's newer offices. And Idaho, as you know, with some of the implications from the pandemic, is just going crazy and growing. And I think when I officially moved to Idaho a couple of years ago, we only had me and another partner in that office. And now we've grown to about 6 or 7. So, and we obviously have partners that are licensed in Idaho that physically reside in other states. So my practice is definitely all over the country. I have a couple cases in New York right now. But I'm definitely working to grow Idaho and continue my practice in Washington and Alaska. So Gordon Reese has a women initiative group, which is focused on women supporting women. I am a part of that. And I think it's definitely fitting that this panel obviously came during the day after International Women's Day. So I have very much enjoyed preparing for this presentation, and I look forward to not only my co-panelist point of view, but hearing your questions and thoughts at the end. I think that always raises insight into keeping the dialogue going and growing women in our amazing industry. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Meredith. I'm batting last here. My name is Mary Salamone, and I'll say greetings from sunny Southern California. I don't know if it's good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. First, let me say I'm honored to have been asked by Levelset to participate in this very meaningful webinar, and I'm privileged to speak with my co-panelists. Mindy and I have known each other for a very long time. So it's nice to reconnect with her, and it's nice to meet Meredith. So I've always asked myself, gee, looking back, I wonder how did I get started in this construction industry? It was really not due to any prior experience I had in the industry or any family member that was involved in the industry. But I've been practicing exclusively in the area of construction law for going on about 34 years now. I started back in 1987, came right out of law school. And as I said, it was not as if when I was graduating from law school, I made a conscious decision that I was going to set down a specific path to the construction industry. What actually happened was that the law school I went to, which was back east, and I'm sure you can't tell that from my voice, that I was not born and raised in Southern California. They had an alumni program, and they connected me with a former alumni who was with the national construction law firm, and he happened to be located in California. So they flew me out. I interviewed with the firm. I really enjoyed everyone that I had met at the firm, and I decided to accept their offer, and I moved cross country from the upstate New York area. So I will tell you this, it has not been the easiest of paths. I've been presented with a number of challenges as a woman in an extremely male-dominated industry. And I hope you'll bear with me while I share a personal story with you that frankly profoundly influenced me along my personal journey, which is continuing in the area of construction law. So about a year or so after I was at my first construction law firm, the senior partner came into my office. It was early in the morning. For those of you that work in construction, your days really start earlier because that's when you may be getting calls from field people and such. But he came into my office, closed the door, sat down in a guest chair that I had across from my desk, and basically said to me that he wanted to have an avuncular chat with me. I instantly had the feeling that this was not going to be good. I had only had limited interaction with this gentleman, barely knew him, barely had done any work for him. But here he was now sitting across from me. And the first thing he said to me was, did I understand what the word avuncular meant? Well, that was kind of the first offense as far as I was concerned. And I responded to him, I think I can figure that out. And then he proceeded to tell me that he thought I did not have what it would take to survive as an attorney in this particular industry. So at that time, I had a plant that was in the corner of my office on the floor near the window. And the firm had provided the plant. It was part of the decor. They had all these plants in everyone's offices, different ones, but scattered throughout the firm. He then proceeded to point to the plant that was on my floor and said to me that I was as green as that plant and that I would never make it as a lawyer in the construction industry. I told him that I disagreed with his assessment, at which point he got up out of the chair without saying another word, walked out of my office, closed the door behind him, and I struggled to keep my composure until he left. And in all candor, the moment that door closed behind him, the tears started filling my eyes, and I began to panic. I was all alone in California. I didn't have any family here of any kind. I started worrying, if he fires me, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to pay for food? So all these thoughts start, swimming through your mind. But it wasn't long that I shed that initial reaction. And then frankly, another emotion came in and started to replace it, which was anger at his comments. And at that point, I became 100% determined and driven to prove him wrong about me. And I did not let his comments undermine my professional goals. So for the next several years, I frankly worked my tail off. I took every opportunity to educate myself, attending seminars and such, anything I could to figure out how to advance myself in this field. Over time, I eventually became that senior partner's go-to person. I was assigned to every large case that he brought through the door, and I was always his first choice. of the person he would go to with any new assignment. After about 6 years or so, I was elevated to partner status in the firm. Plants I mentioned to you that were scattered throughout the office. She watered them, fertilized them, trimmed them. And it's interesting because she owned the company, but her name was Denise. And whenever I was in my office, when Denise was coming by to tend to these plants, she would tell me, Mary, please let me get you a new plant. That plant is so old. Please let me replace it. And I told her that I would never allow that plant to be replaced, and I wanted it maintained at all times. Long story short, I stayed at that firm for nearly 17 years before I finally decided to move on to another construction firm. And on my last day at that firm, before I walked out of my office, I turned to that very plant and said out loud, I guess we made it. That plant had become that symbolic to me. It had stayed with me for those 17 years. And every time I looked at that plant, it reminded me of that comment he made that I was as green as that plant. Now, I shouldn't mislead you to let you think that that initial comment that I got from that senior partner was the sole episode of bias I experienced at that firm. Oh no, I was treated to a few other remarks. I'll share just a couple more with you. One remark I heard was, there were two tracks at this firm, the partnership track and the mommy track, and you could not do both and do both well. Another choice comment was when I was handed my bonus check, I was told to go out and buy myself a nice bikini with the money. So I could go on, but the point of the matter is I don't tell you about these episodes to discourage you, but instead to motivate you all, because it sure as heck motivated me. And while women have made great strides in this construction industry, we're still facing obstacles that we must overcome every day to compete and to change the hearts and minds in this well-ensconced, male-dominated world of construction. So thank you for allowing me to share with you my rather rocky start in the field of construction law. With that, I want to turn to our first topic, which is essentially a survey that was conducted by Levelset. But I'm going to start by sharing with you first some general statistics about the industry. According to the National Association of Women in Construction, and that organization is also known by the acronym NAWIC, women currently comprise only about 9.9% of the total of people in the construction field, and that includes those whose jobs are behind a desk. The number of women in the field on the front lines, as you say, is roughly 1% of all construction workers. Now, these numbers are rather staggering when one considers that women make up 47% of the entire workforce. So that means the construction industry is still astoundingly skewed. Many women have avoided the field due to the perceptions of traditionally male-dominated industry. Even still, women, though, continue to grow in numbers in the industry, with almost 33% of the companies promoting women to senior positions in 2018. While the glass ceiling is yet to be shattered in the construction industry, 13.3% of the women in construction are tradespeople. And of those promoted to senior roles, 31% are in management, 21% are in construction and maintenance, and 1.5% are in service positions. Finally, 44 of the top 100 construction companies see women holding executive positions, with 16% having women occupy chief level positions. 3 of those top 100 companies have women CEOs. So we have reason to be encouraged. So now let's turn back to the survey that was conducted by Levelset. That was conducted in February of 2021, just this past year. And there were 1,000 women in the industry that were surveyed, and they were asked a variety of questions, which we're going to review shortly because the results are really quite interesting. But I'd first like to start by sharing just a few of the demographics of the survey participants, and then we'll move into some of the questions and answers. But first, one of the questions that they were asked is, what describes the company you work for? 44% basically said they work for a subcontractor. 37% roughly said they worked for a general contractor. About 11% said they worked for material suppliers, and about 5% worked for architect or engineering firms. One of the other questions they were asked is, which best describes your current role? 25% said that they were an office administrator. 18% said they are managers. Roughly 10% were presidents or CEOs. Roughly 10% were project managers. About another 10% were administrative assistants, and about 6% were vice presidents. What is your highest level of formal education? About 32% said they had a bachelor's degree. 22% said they had a high school graduate. 18% said they had an associate's degree. 11% had a technical college certification, and about 11% had a master's degree. Now, I'm going to move to some generic questions they were asked, where they were simply asked, do they agree, do they disagree, or were they neutral on these various subjects? The first question they were asked was, people in leadership in my company encourage respect towards women. 81% said they agree with that statement. 12% were neutral, and roughly 6.5% disagreed. Another question, my opinions, ideas, and suggestions are genuinely considered. Almost 80% said they strongly agree or agree with that statement. 11% said they were neutral, and 9% said they disagreed. Another question, I feel respected and valued as my male counterparts. 66% said they agreed with that. Roughly 16% were neutral, and about 18% said they disagreed. Another question, I would have more opportunity to advance if I were a man. 31% said they agreed with that. 24% were neutral on the subject. 45% said they disagreed with that statement. Next question. There are good opportunities in construction for women. 59% agreed with the statement. Roughly 26% were neutral, and 15% disagreed. And the final one I wanted to call to your attention is, the role of women in construction is changing for the better. 68% agreed with that comment. 27% were neutral, and about 5% disagreed with that comment. So with that, let's look at some of the specific questions that were asked and some of the responses that women were asked to actually type in. So the first question is, what is the most challenging part of working in the construction industry? And you'll see on your slide, I'm not going to read to you every one of the comments, but there were 1,000 that I was filtering through, and I tried to call out those that I thought were particularly noteworthy, or those where I noticed the comment was getting pretty consistently repeated. So the first one was sharing ideas for improvement, but men think they know better. Being spoken over, having to prove yourself more than the men. The most challenging part of working in construction, particularly as a woman, is being constantly overlooked by my male counterparts. Even with amazing ideas and valuable input, it's never as important as the man in the room. And not being taken seriously. The next question that they were asked is, what is your favorite thing about working in the construction industry? And a number of people made comments along the lines of the first bullet point you see and the last, that they derived a great deal of satisfaction off of seeing the finished product of their hard work and efforts. Another comment was feeling like I'm a trailblazer and helping future women not have to face the same struggles that I did. Getting to help the community in a tangible way, to show people that you were wrong about a woman in a man's world. And if you advance the slide, several more comments were selected. The look of surprise so many men get when they realize how knowledgeable I actually am in the field. And the industry is constantly changing and evolving. The participants were also asked, of course, then what is your least favorite thing about working in construction? And I chose a few representative responses you see here. the lack of other women in similar roles to talk to and grow with, the lack of respect in the industry. One of the ones that drew my attention was this comment, misogynistic men. And I'm going to tell you another quick story as to why that drew my attention. I was working on a case not that long ago, about a couple years ago, and I was representing a large national construction firm. And one of the people I had to interact with as part of this litigation was their project executive, who was a gentleman, probably in his late 50s, is my estimation. And just with my dealings with this gentleman, I observed that he was just unduly harsh towards women, including myself. He often raised his voice to us, the women involved, and just generally was more difficult to deal with. And so he was going to be deposed in the case. And I had some concerns about him generally as a witness. And when I target a witness that I think could present problems in testimony, I bring in a consulting service I use that helps me for jury consulting and trial consulting and witness prep. And I do that sometimes. So if I'm dealing with the in-house counsel, they can see the opinion of somebody else in the assessment of a witness, because it certainly would affect strategy going forward. So I brought in, I usually deal with a female consultant, but in this case, I decided I was going to bring in a male consultant because of the individual project executive I was dealing with. I felt he wouldn't take constructive criticism as well from a woman as he would from a man. So I elected to bring in a male consultant from that company. And we do mock testimony so the consultant can see how the witness is fielding questions. Well, on this particular project, there were two women that were the project manager roles. One that was working for my client, the general contractor, and the counterpart, the owner, was a woman as well. So I targeted questions around these women, and his response kept coming back on the order of, well, our project manager was an Hispanic female, and the owner's project manager was a Hispanic female. And you know how they can be, or comments, they can tend to be, quick-tempered. At which point the jury consultant says, wait a minute, stop. You cannot answer questions in that fashion. And this project executive said, why not? What's the problem? He said, well, you're stereotyping women. That you shouldn't do that. That's not acceptable. And he said, well, I don't understand what the problem is. And he says, well, you sound like a misogynist. At which point the project executive said, what does that mean? So we knew we had a problem. The in-house general counsel was there, witnessed this whole exchange, and decided time to alter strategy. So anytime I see that commentary, it reminds me of that episode. And so, of course, I had to include that on my list. The last comment, the Good Old Boys Club still exists in a lot of places throughout the industry. That comment resonated with me, so I chose that as well. So moving to the next slide is, what advice would you give to a woman just starting out in the construction industry? One comment was, keep working to do it better. In the right company, there is room to grow and learn. It's a great industry to be a part of, but understand this still tends to be a man's world. So learn to hold firm, keep your self-worth close, and know that you hold value in the company you're working for. Another comment, stand up for yourself and don't sell yourself short on knowledge and work ethic. And I saw this one a lot, the last one. Put on a layer of thick skin. That was a relatively common comment that I noticed. Going to the next slide again, carrying on with what advice would you give to a woman just starting out in the industry? Be confident in yourself and your skills. If your passion for what you do is anything like mine, convert any negativity that may come your way into motivation and drive. And that I take to heart, because that's exactly what I did when I started in this business. I agree with Mindy. When she and I both started in the mid 80s, we were an extremely rare breed in this industry. There were very few female construction attorneys. So we were certainly pioneers and had to deal with a lot of grief as a result of that. Seek out training and never stop learning. Again, something else I firmly subscribe to. Don't take it personally. Set your pride aside, because you will get angry frequently and distracted from your goals. Again, another comment that resonates with me in that regard, all true. I remember I was a partner in the firm and having executives at construction companies dub me as their little worker bee, expressions like that. I did not take those things to heart. I just put my head down, kept moving forward. And then the last question the participants in the survey were asked is, would you like to add anything else? So this gave these ladies an opportunity to just share some thoughts that may be outside the specific questions they were being asked. We need more women in construction. Amen to that. Construction is ready for innovation and women can bring that change that is much needed. The field is excellent for women that are goal-driven and detail-oriented. Constantly proving you are as good or as better as your male counterpart might be exhausting, but at the end of the day, you still proved yourself. And women are just as powerful as men. These are all very positive comments and good productive feedback. So at this point, we're going to segue from the survey and we're going to move to a topic of implicit bias. And of course, I can't help myself. I'm going to tee this subject up for Mindy with another personal story I have to share on this topic. I'm sure you're all thinking I must be wearing a coat of armor with some of these stories I'm telling, but I have lived the tale and I have survived and kept my sanity along the way. So basically, after a few years of practicing law, the law firm I mentioned to you where I started my career, they finally allowed me to start taking and defending witness depositions. So that was a big deal. I think I was a second or third year attorney where I was allowed to do that. I was unleashed. And I remember when I would walk into conference rooms at opposing counsel's office where these depositions were taking place, as soon as I walked into the conference room, I was immediately identified as, you must be the court reporter. No, I'm not the court reporter. In fact, when I would check in at the receptionist desk, the female receptionist would always say to me, I guess you must be the court reporter. So I can understand how something like that would happen. As I've mentioned, it was kind of rare to see women involved in construction cases. And I got to the place where it didn't bother me. I learned to just simply shrug it off. But unfortunately, what happened to me in the late 80s, early 90s, is still apparently alive and well today, because it's over 30 years later now, and I'm still encountering this issue. By way of an example, I was involved in an arbitration in a highway project in Northern California. And despite the pandemic, we actually conducted evidentiary hearings in person at a hotel conference room. We booked a conference room where we each had about 1,000 square feet of space around us, so we could exercise ample social distancing. And I've never met the arbitrator. I've never been on a Zoom meeting with the arbitrator. We'd only dealt with him either by email or on phone calls. So I walked into the first day of hearings. This was in September of 2020. And I had one of those briefcases that's on wheels. And so I'm wheeling my briefcase into this hotel conference center. And immediately the arbitrator gets up and says to me, you must be our court reporter. And I thought to myself, oh no, not this again. But I very politely said to him, no, I'm actually Mary Salamone. And I guess, to his defense, he was in his late 60s. So maybe this was a remnant of that era. And again, there is a small fraction of women that are construction lawyers, but I was not going to let that ruffle me, rattle me, or get me off to a bad start. And all's well that ends well. By the time I had concluded that arbitration, he had awarded my client 100% of our damages, which were nearly $7 million. And right now I have an application for legal fees in front of him under his consideration. So seemed like a rough start, but when all was said and done, I guess I must have gained his respect, even though it started off thinking I was the court reporter. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mindy.
Thank you, Mary. Mary, you have set the stage for us perfectly to talk about our next topic, which is implicit bias. And so let me run through some fundamental concepts. Before I do that, I just want to put it into context. I am sure while Mary was talking that all of us that are on the panel and watching this panel presentation were doing something similar. And that is we were breathing. And probably none of us really thought about the fact that we were breathing while Mary was doing her exercise. But I just bet you, if I asked you now to think about your breathing, to concentrate on your breathing, and I asked you to, for example, take in a breath and hold it for 4 seconds, that you could do that, and then release it when I asked you to release it. We're going to put that into context, but just think about this concept of doing something so subconsciously, so unconsciously that you're not even thinking about it. But when you call your attention to it, you can actually change the way that you were doing that activity, in this case, breathing. So keep that in mind as we talk about the implicit bias concept. This is so fundamental to so many of the things that Mary was talking about just moments ago, about the history of women in construction law, the history of women in the construction industry, and how implicit bias and implicit associations affect the women and or other groups of underrepresented groups in this industry. So what is implicit bias or an implicit association? It has many definitions, but generally it is an attitude or stereotype that affects our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Just as we were talking about with breathing a moment ago, these implicit associations and implicit biases exist within us without even our conscious thought or our conscious awareness. These biases are, again, and unconsciously, you're going to hear me say that word over and over because it's so important to recognize how they are unconscious and not subject to our intentional thought. So they're unconsciously held set of associations about a particular group or an individual. And these associations that we harbor in our subconscious cause us to have feelings and attitudes about other people based on their group, their characteristics as a race, ethnicity, age, sex, appearance. All of that can be impacted by our implicit biases. Next slide, please. Some critical concepts for you to know as you think about implicit bias and how it affects us. Implicit biases are pervasive. Every single human being breathing on this earth possesses implicit biases and implicit associations. And I wish almost that they hadn't given it the term implicit biases, because while our implicit associations could be described as negative, biases don't necessarily have to take on a negative connotation, and our implicit associations can cover the gamut from negative to positive. So it's very much a part of the human condition. Every single person has them. They develop over the course of a lifetime based on your childhood, your upbringing, your religious beliefs, your school experiences, your community experiences. And as we have gotten deeper and deeper into media and social media, and not just having 3 channels on the television, which once again, I'm aging myself, and instead now we've got 300 or more channels on the television. Anyway, as we have more and more media in our lives, and social media now, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all of that, all of these images that we see through the media often are cited through research that they can impact our implicit associations. There are some critical concepts that I would like you to keep in mind here. Again, I've told you that these associations are implicit. They are subconscious or unconsciously activated, and they can impact our actions and our reactions. So again, they're involuntarily activated, even without our awareness or control. It can be an association or reaction that is favorable, can be very favorable, or unfavorable. And while implicit and explicit biases are related, they are distinct mental constructs. Let's think about the experience Mary was telling us about with the potted plant. that she was as green as that potted plant and was never going to make it. That is probably a representation, a good representation of an explicit association that that man voiced to Mary. He just did not think that she was going to have it because she was green and she was a woman. But perhaps he didn't. What do you think about this? What if he hadn't expressed that to Mary? But when he walked in and saw Mary sitting there, in his mind, maybe even without consciously processing it, he said, oh, geez, this woman's never going, she's a woman. She's never going to make it in construction law. If he hadn't voiced that to Mary, Mary might not have known that he felt that way, but those thoughts and those associations could have very much dictated how he treated Mary. He probably would not have given her much mentoring or much opportunity to advance within the law firm. So while the implicit and the explicit, like I said, may be associated, they are different. Let's talk about instinct versus bias, because I've said that not all implicit associations are negative. They can be very positive. What if you have an implicit association, maybe you had teachers in school that led you to believe that people who wear glasses, which is why I'm wearing mine, by the way, are inherently intelligent and brilliant. Well, if you just think that, you may not even question that association. So you may treat people who wear glasses with a heightened degree of respect for their intellectual ability than you might someone who doesn't wear glasses. So it can be a very positive association. And sometimes we draw these instinctive reactions to be a source of support or protection and to bring us comfort in less familiar experiences. So the question is, as we move forward to what we hope will be a more enlightened approach to diversity and equality and inclusion, how do these implicit biases impact our ability to move forward to a greater enlightenment? How are people impacted by our failure, your own failure to recognize your implicit biases, or to reset and take a more objective view once you realize you have just had an implicit association? Who is helped or who is hurt? What if the immediate reaction that someone has is misleading or wrong, and we go forward to act on those implicit associations without an accurate reset? Is that fair and just? Well, for example, Mary's partner, who thought not much more of her than a potted plant in the beginning days, ended up using Mary as his go-to person. So he did reset his associations. And in that way, Mary was able to accomplish all that she accomplished in that firm. But if he had not had recognized these associations and had not reset his view, it could have meant that Mary was constantly pushed down, and would not have reached the levels of achievement that she did. So the question also is the impact greater or more frequently experienced by those who have been historically underrepresented or less privileged? Well, I pose that question to you, and I suggest that the answer is yes, that those who have been historically unrepresented probably take much more of an impact by these implicit associations, implicit biases. So what is not going to change when we're talking about implicit biases? Having implicit biases and associations is not going to change. As I said, it is part of the human condition. Drawing quick, instinctive reactions and responses is perfectly normal within a human. And we can't expect anyone to stop from doing that, nor do we. But let's think about what can change. And what can change is that instinctive reactions can change over time, kind of like Mary's partner. And we can change what we do with our instinctive reactions. But the instinct to react will not change. What we want to do is change the gears that turn very normally in our mind. Next slide, and to see if we can to interrupt the way that they are churning, because everyone is affected by biasing, by stereotyping in very subtle, more nuanced and less obvious ways. You might have heard it as being described as microaggressions, and as individuals who are not represented by the majority in an industry like construction or construction law. These microaggressions, it's kind of like the death by 1,000 cuts. The 1,000th cut may be the one that finally brings you to your knees. But as Mary said, in order to move forward, you put your head down and you progress. But we want to, through the conversation today, at least start to understand how our individual associations born of implicit bias can be an obstacle or maybe even advantage in the support and development of others as well as ourselves. I want to say this one concept very loudly, so I'm going to shout. This is not a matter of finding fault or blame. Every human being has these implicit associations and implicit biases. So it's not a matter of casting judgment, particularly when you are dealing with your own recognition of how implicit biases might affect yourself or someone else. It's a natural response. The key is to recognize that these implicit associations exist, and without judgment, even on yourself, to then say, I just had an implicit bias moment. I'm going to stop. I'm going to reset the way I'm thinking about this individual or this group so that I can go on in a more productive manner. We want to pivot, because these implicit associations and biases, we want to stop them from being in a disruptive force. And if we recognize where the implicit bias exists and not allow ourselves to act or react as our biases may dictate, we can stop the cycle of these implicit associations from harming the advancement of women in construction and in construction law by pivoting, by separating our implicit associations and biases from our actions and reactions, and not allowing ourselves to act or react as our biases may dictate. We can deliberately separate those associations and prevent those from dictating how we act and react. The goal here is to identify implicit biases and to pause without judgment so that the cycle of reaction can be interrupted. We want to learn the skills for taking effective action in the face of long established automatic thoughts and feelings. And I know that that is a lot to throw out to you as you're listening to this discussion today. But if we had, 4 days, I could go on for 4 days talking about this. But please take note of this concept and think about it, and maybe do a little more reading on your own as to how these implicit associations, implicit biases can affect the advancement of women in construction law and in the construction industry as a whole. So Meredith, having set that foundation for how implicit biases are very much a part of advancing women in our industry, let me turn it over to you to further the discussion on that.
Great. Thank you, Mindy. So the third segment of our 3-part discussion is going to talk about breaking barriers and looking into the future. And I really think that this third section is a great segue into what both Mary and Mindy discussed as far as, the survey results, and we need more women in construction and proving yourself. And I want to give some specific examples of, building your toolbox to making yourself an invaluable part of your team, and then also ways to eliminate implicit bias, both in others and in yourself. Because again, we all have those. So one of the questions from the survey results that stuck out to me was, what is your favorite thing about working in construction? And the answer to that was proving that I can do better, faster with beautiful results. And I just love that. But the question is how to get those tangible results, right? We can talk about it, but how do you implement that and really prove yourself in your office, in your company, your firm, whatever it may be. And I'm a big believer, and I've been fortunate that I've entered the construction stratosphere a little bit later than Mindy and Mary did. And I think we've seen some positive growth because of them kind of being trailblazers for women. And I'm thankful to that, but I'm definitely a believer in, I've had similar stories that Mary shared, and I kind of put my head down and said, okay, how can I make myself valuable for me and also others, where those implicit bias drop away from my superiors and coworkers, because they just see it. They see that a female in the construction industry is, kicking butt. So how do you do that? You do that from things like this: seminars, training, webinars. Stay current and fresh. You don't need to, if you're a field person or you're in the office, you don't need to be an expert in everything. Just learn to issue spot. And we'll talk about those a little bit on the next slide. But knowing what your company needs and kind of being ahead of that and creating value for yourself and bringing new ideas, I think is just paramount. I've seen it for me personally in success in my firms. And then building relationships with lawyers, consultants, people in your industry that aren't necessarily in your office. Like one of my best girlfriends from college, she is now a principal at a big construction company in Seattle, and we kind of both grew the ladder together. And it's always nice to have people in your own firm or your office that you have connections with, and people in the industry, but outside. Obviously, those conversations can be different, and they're all important. So seek out training and never stop learning, whether it be formal or informal, with the relationships you have. Next slide, please. So educate yourself, and then you will empower yourself. I'm a big believer in this. So one of the questions was, what advice would you give women that are just starting out in the construction industry and have a strong sense of self-confidence and know your worth? And I think that's just beautifully said. So examples of this, which obviously each of these in themselves could be 2-hour webinars or CLEs for attorneys. But some things that came to mind in looking at the attendee list was like contract drafting and managing risk before contract execution and work starts. So, if you in your role have the ability to take a look at the contract documents, and, every state's different on things that are enforceable, like liquidated damages, consequential damages, what's the venue and dispute resolution provisions. Oftentimes where the project is located controls a lot of the law and how certain provisions are enforced. So if you can get your hands on that and you have the ability to sort of spot check that and bring this to the forefront, again, I think that makes you a valuable member of the team, and it also obviously protects your company, and project administration go much smoother. For example, change orders, how those are negotiated and executed. Those are all really important things to get ahead of, before the NTP is even issued. Lien law, as we all know, lien law is a statute. It's a creature of statute, and it is strictly enforced. And deadlines, notice requirements, filing a formal lien if you don't get paid, all of those things are strictly enforced and they're statutory, and they change in every state. So one thing I do for my clients a lot is I will give them a little cheat sheet that they can have on their desk, whether they're a first-tier contractor or subcontractor, to know their rights and know the deadlines for each. So if you are with a company that does work across multiple jurisdictions and in different locations, this is something I would, again, if your role is where you're managing these things from a payment view, take a look at these, and obviously, call an attorney if you want, or just sometimes it's very easy to find these resources online and get ahead of those things. Job posting requirements. PPP, as we all know, has been a big deal with small contractors with COVID. So these qualifying forms are deemed certifications for, compliance is later questioned. So if you are in a role where you're filling out some of these forms for your company, make sure that you're doing them correctly, work with an accountant, work with a lawyer. If you're really a small business, and I know that the requirements are changing. And I think under the Trump administration, you could get a PPP loan. you couldn't get the PPP loan if you had any sort of felony record. Now under the Biden administration, you can, but it can't be it has to be like a non-white collar felony. It can't be like a financial felony. So criminals can now get, PPP loan depending on their record. So again, these forms can be certifications under like the False Claims Act. Make sure they're filled out complete. So again, these are just some issues that I thought of. Another thing is document retention. As we all know, an implicit bias could be, well, men aren't as good as detailed documents. Let's not say that, but women can be very good at that. So take a look at your document retention. How is your daily reports? What are your weekly reports? Things like that. Because if you ever get in an issue later, I always find that putting that the pieces of the puzzle back together for clients can be the hardest thing. So what does your document retention look like? And if you ever needed to prove a claim or defend one down the road, how would that help or hurt you? So those are some ideas that I thought of that, again, could segue into further discussions, but keep fresh on these things in areas that you do projects. And I think you will find yourself an important part of the discussion, internally and adding value to your company. Next slide, please. So value through diversity. As we all know, diversity enhances overall performance. So, I know in our group, we are a very diverse group at my Seattle-based construction practice group. And we all have similar qualities and core values, but we all gained those from different backgrounds and experiences. So whether you were an athlete or you were in the military, that's okay to want to hire people that, want to work hard. But I find that is elevated when you interview and you work with people from different backgrounds and experiences. Don't hire people that are just like you, because you will actually, they're almost your mentors more than you will be their mentors, because you can grow from their experiences and your group will just be elevated. And value each role on your team. No one role is better than the other. They're different, but they're all essential. And all of your team members should feel valued and important, and including yourself. So be asked for what you want and be prepared to get it. I'm a big believer in that. I think we all do that. We ask for what we want and then, wow, we actually got it. So what does that mean? And be prepared to rise to the challenge. I remember my boss said, okay, Meredith, it's time for you to start building your own practice. And then he supported me and it's like, okay, I got to go do that. So again, get those tools in your toolbox and be prepared, ask for what you want, and be prepared to get it. I think establishing trust and rapport, monthly outings, offsite socialization gives team members the ability to appreciate one another for who they are and not just the jobs they do. We all know that you don't have to be friends with everybody you work with, but really having an authentic respect for each other and knowing people's backgrounds. I mean, everyone's fighting a battle that we don't know. It helps you eliminate their bias, but also your own bias, and it breaks those barriers down. And I think especially with COVID, we have all seen the effects of not being able to interact face to face. And so finding ways to do that in this new environment, I think is really important. Whether it's one thing I did for some clients is we did like a wine event where we shipped everybody wine, and we did a wine tasting, obviously, after work hours, and we collaborated and had a social event, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. So another thing is, this is not an HR webinar by any means, but I always find working out differences with genuine respect informally does wonders. I think a lot of times if something, happens, even if it's bad, try to communicate with those people and understand where they're coming from and you're coming from. And sometimes it's just a miscommunication. I think a lot of times people don't intend things. People have bad days. People have bad days at home. It doesn't come out correctly. So we've all had those conversations and they don't necessarily come out to begin with, but it's a learned skill, right? You get better at it. You get better at approaching someone in person versus an email. Sometimes that's better. So learn to work out differences and communicate. And my biggest thing is be a positive example. I mean, I've been fortunate that my mentor is a male and he's a minority and he's exactly 10 years ahead of me. And it's because somebody worked with him and he doesn't have those biases with women. Right? He's worked with women. So it kind of is a top-down approach. And He's a positive example of that. So I'm a positive example of that. And the next slide, creating mentorship. So it's easy to see yourself and others and foster those relationships, right? Don't underestimate the value in establishing diverse relationships, because oftentimes you're going to get just as much out of those as that mentor or mentee will get out of their relationship. And, again, this comes to building your team as well. See strength in others in areas that you may be weak in. I mean, don't put people that have the exact same background and are exactly like you, because you only need one Meredith or one Mindy. You want a diverse group of people, and that's just going to elevate your office and your overall work performance. Consider a formal mentorship program. I know some of our groups in our firm have that, but mentorship doesn't require formality. I have mentors and mentees, internal, external. Some of them I would say are not necessarily in the construction industry, but they're a sounding board for me. And they were a trailblazer in their own industry, and I talked to them, how did they get there as far as marketing, things like that. So it doesn't need to be formal. I know a lot of firms are implementing, mentorship program, mentee programs, and that's not required. If that's something that draws to you, you can make that happen with some of the authentic relationships that you're developing. And, we all know mentors advocate for your mentees. My boss certainly. And then other mentors will say, hey, Meredith would be great for that. And they, push my name forward. So I strongly encourage that mentors do that for their mentees. And then that flows down to kind of the next generation. And like I said, mentees, ask for what you need and be prepared to get it. I think having strong women in construction, to have a voice and work hard. And then when you get it, do a great job at it and be prepared for that. Next slide. And that's it. I think we finished right on time. So any questions for, either Mary, Mindy, and I? We're a little over, but I think it's not a problem if people want to type in questions and have a discussion.
Thank you all three so much, Mary, Meredith, and Mindy. That was a wonderful presentation. And I know whoever tuned in and watched really got a lot from that. And yes, if you have any questions, type it in the chat box. But I also wanted to mention, as Meredith talked about, empower yourself and educate yourself. Levelset actually has a lot of resources on our website. One thing that we just started was our Credit Management Academy. So for any credit managers out there watching, we have a whole course now that is released on our website, and it's all free. And it is a huge educational resource for all of you credit managers. And there's also resources for every state about lien law as well, and notices and all these things. And I think a lot of people, they bring that value to the table when they are educated and know those nuances and technical information. So I just wanted to say that. And I think we have, where is this Q&A box? Tara, I don't know if you're in the background there, but the Q&A panel box icon, it says there's one on there, but it's not popping up for me, unfortunately. But I also,
it says, thank you. Are there local chapters of the Women in Construction group? That's the question.
Okay, thanks, Meredith.
Yeah.
For NAWIC, there are local chapters, and I believe it's nawic.org. You can go to their website, and they also have a NAWIC Women page on LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, I'd say check that out. And also during Women in Construction Week, this whole week, they are having programs and sponsored events. So you can definitely go check that out there. I'm sure they're on Facebook, local chapters. I've seen some here and there. So definitely check that out. Let's see. Oh yeah, there we go, nawic.org. And actually the NAWIC president tuned in today. So thank you for being here, Anne. And she also shared her email address there in the chat box as well. So I encourage you to get involved with that. And here are our panelists' email addresses. if you want to follow up with them or thank them or whatever. So I think if we don't have any questions out there, we can conclude. We're just right on time here. So, and I know we got a few chats in that it was a great program, and to say thank you to everyone.